So remember yesterday we talked about that when you start your Android device, you get a whole bunch of these so-called managers. The managers are basically your access to a system services. System services are basically a whole bunch of things that do certain vertical things, right? So for example, location manager would be your access to a location service. Wi-Fi manager to Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, telephony, vibrator, alarm, NFC, battery, package, application, blah, blah, blah. There are a lot of these managers. You kind of get the idea, right? So sensor and location are part of that. They're not all that different, okay? So now to illustrate how they work, like we did touch on this yesterday when we talked about the alarm manager, but the alarm manager is not a very typical one. Sensor or location would be way more typical. Okay, so let me give you an example of a piece of code that I wrote a while back that illustrates some of these tools. By the way, a lot of this code that I'm referring to is in my GitHub, github.com/Maracana. There's a repository called Android code, and you could clone it. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna download it and I'll import it into our package, our workspace. At the end of the day, I'll give you the entire workspace. So you're gonna have the enchilada, everything right in there. So don't worry about that, right? So let me make sure that this is downloaded. Cool. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna say import as existing projects into workspace from archive. I'm gonna point to that archive, and there's a bunch of code in there, right? Now keep in mind that not everything's gonna build because of different versions of Android that I may have been using and blah blah blah. But I'm also gonna wanna close a lot of these projects because I don't wanna have to fix every single one of them right now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to close them when Eclipse becomes responsive. This project. Okay, so the one that I do want to show you is the compass. Okay, compass. There we go. So it's an old piece of code that I wrote a while back. Where's my phone? And it doesn't really do it justice to show you on the emulator, because I remember shaking my laptop won't do much. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it on my phone. Yes. How do I test apps on my device?
Yeah, what are you doing right now?
That's a good point. I take this USB key and I just plug it in, and that's it, literally. And when I click on run, magically my device appears.
You have to set up a couple settings on your device.
Yeah, you need to enable USB debugging.
USB debug, that's it.
That's the only thing. So it's under system, system application development, enable USB debugging, and possibly allow unknown sources, but you should not have to do that.
And that's pretty much the same for Macs and PCs?
Yes, except on PCs you also need to get a driver, which is, something that's a pain. Like you have to go to the website of your manufacturer and download the right driver and install it, yada yada. It's complex, just time wasting thing, right? But you don't need to do that on a Mac. So okay, so I'm installing it on the physical device, and there it is. So let me just show you what I'm gonna do. Is I'm gonna do the DMS, and I'm gonna show you like this. So it's basically a little compass thingy that rotates as I keep on rotating. It's smoother on the device than it is on the screen, but you can kind of see how. Okay, got it? Very simple thing. So I want to illustrate two things in this example. I'm going to show you how to use sensors, and also how to write custom components, right? Yeah, you don't need this code. It's going to be it is in your book. It's in a chapter 14 or 15. And it's also on the web, and I'll put it as part of the entire workspace. So your workspace is just going to contain all the samples, and I'll give you all that, right? So yeah, you don't need to. This is just more of a lecture at this point. But what we are talking about right now, just to kind of prep you guys up, is you're gonna have to take this into. You're gonna have to take what we just did, and you're gonna do it in Yamba. And the way you're going to do it in Yamba is you're going to add the location to Twitter. Yeah, you'll see. So let me show you my compass. There are only two files of significance, right? First, a couple of things that I want to point out. Remember I said that when you work with system services, regardless of which system service it is, this is pretty much going to look like that, right? You're going to say sensor manager get system service, sensor service, right? We did that yesterday for alarm service, right? We did alarm manager equals, blah, 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 right? So you're always going to have a line like that. Then, this is not very typical. It really depends on the particular API, right? In sensor manager, it has something called get default sensor. Right? It just returns the default sensor because guess what? There are multiple sensors that it works with. Now, something that is very typical is that sensors tend to work on a lot of these system services tend to work on a register and get callbacks mechanism, right? So it's a sort of like publish subscribe or observer observable pattern, right? So it's not like you're pulling the information from a sensor, but rather you let the sensor push it back to you, right? So you almost always have something of this form. You register for notifications and you unregister for notifications, right? Sometimes these things are called differently. You may say register, unregister. You may say something else. Like what's the other terminology for register, unregister? Subscribe, unsubscribe. That sort of. They have different names, but they do the same thing, right? Same concept, right? Pub sub, right? Or sub pub, I guess. Subscribe, get published. So what we're doing here is we're saying register a listener, right? And we're saying basically sensor manager, let me know when there's something changes on this particular sensor that I care about, which happens to refer to that sensor there, right? Make sense? This is just some flag, not that important, and this refers to the class itself, namely Compass, right? So for Compass to be able to get notifications, Compass must implement the on sensor event listener. Okay, so it's very typical. Telephony, you're going to have the same thing. Wi-Fi, you're going to have the same thing, and so on and so on. So now, when you look at it down here, what we have is we have the couple of methods that are part of being. So these three methods are part of being the on a sensor event listener, right? So that's how you get notifications. So the system is going to call you now when you register. So you register this. That's why the system is going to call in this the methods on accuracy changed, on sensor changed, on configuration changed. So far so good? So it's a pretty similar, a pretty common pattern, right? Now, once you're done with the sensor, you're gonna unregister, right? Now the question is, when are you gonna register and unregister? And it comes back to our life cycle of the activity, right? Remember we talked about this a couple of times. We said if I typically want those things that take a lot of power consumption to be only limited to running state, right? And we said the good way to do that limiting is to basically do on resume, on resume, on resume. Is when you turn it on, the opposite is on pause where you turn it off, right? So that is one way of doing it. So that's why I subscribing on resume, unsubscribing on pause. Yeah? That makes sense? Now, I said I was going to show you another thing here, and that's how the custom components work, right? Because you know, I went out and I was trying to find a widget that looks just like that, just like my rows, but I couldn't. I couldn't find a widget that looks just like this, right? So guess what? I had to make one. So how do you make it? Well, let's take a look at that. So so what I did is I created this object called rows. Now rows is a view. So whenever you want to create a new widget, you're gonna subclass view because view is the mother of all widgets, right? Or views, right? AKA component in Java, right? So in this case, as opposed to subclassing view, I subclassed image view, right? And then in the image view, I overrode on draw. That's where the actual drawing happens, right? So if you basically create your own object by subclassing an existing one, the lowest one is the view itself, and then implementing on draw, where you basically are given a canvas, and then within that canvas you can do whatever you want. You can draw pixels, you can draw shapes, you can, in my case I just set an image, right? And in my case what I'm doing is I'm just rotating the canvas. I actually figure out the middle of the canvas, I rotate it, and then I draw the graphic that was going to be drawn anyway. So basically I draw the graphic on a rotated canvas.
How is direction getting changed?
So what happens is, how is the direction getting changed? So basically, when a sensor detects a change in sensor, it calls back on configuration change, which we on sensor changed, which we use. We figure out what is the value from that element. 0 refers to x coordinate, y is 1, and z is 2, right? So it just, each sensor has data in a different box, right? And they're always going to be floating point numbers. You just got to figure out, okay, if I'm using, you know, temperature sensor, then it's 0 means Fahrenheit, whatever, right? And so based on that orientation, we then set Rose's orientation, and that's what this guy uses to draw. By the way, drawing doesn't, this method on draw is called by the system, but one way you can tell the system that it should redraw your component is by saying invalidate. So by invalidating this, you're saying, hey system, I'm no longer valid, I need somebody to repaint me. And the system schedules the repainting eventually to come along.
Invalidate creates a redraw.
Can you what?
So invalidate is sort of like the refresh screen.
Yeah, so invalidate leaves a message for the system to call on draw. So it's asynchronous call back into this. Right? That's what it does. So that's what this guy looks like. It's a very simple custom widget, right? Piece of graphics that I just rotate on a canvas. But by the same token, you can do whatever you want. This is your canvas. You can now go and draw pixels, draw 2D graphics, 3D graphics, whatever you want. Right? All right, so let's do let's compare this to something else. I'll show you another example. This other example is called where am I? No, the example is called where am I? Oh, I don't have where am I example. Okay, well, we're gonna do that where am I example right in the Yamba. So I was gonna show you first, but it doesn't matter. What we're gonna do, so let's think about this. So I would like to now use a location service. It's very similar to what we've seen, right? So let's do this one together. So in Yamba, we have the opportunity to specify our location. Okay. So which code? Where would we want to do this? Status activity. All right, status activity. Okay. So what was the first thing that we always do when we need when we work with system services? No, remember I said this is the thing that's common for all of them. Yeah, get it, right? We need to get it, right? So I'm gonna define it. So location manager.
So I'm sorry, but for using the sensors, you don't have to take permission from the system.
Not for sensors. Not for sensors, but yes for location. But we'll get to that. Location is not considered a sensor, right? It's a different, yeah. Just your sensors are your things like, you know, orientation, magnetic field, temperature. There even was a tricorder sensor. You guys know what that is? Yeah. You know what it is? Yes, it looks up for life on different planets. I'm serious about this. It's so sensor. So these are the various sensors. So sensor orientation, proximity, temperature, tricorder. It's been deprecated, but it was there, right? There was also a, let me show you the constant. You have all these gravities on all the major planets, but also there's gravity on the island.
What island?
Lost, right?
Gravity is estimating the first Death Star in Empire units.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah. So that, yeah, they can get funny. All right. So location manager, we know number one, right? We get it, right? But we know nothing about it. So you guys should get familiar with documentation by this point. Location manager, bam. Okay. So because you're gonna be asking me later, how does Wi-Fi work? I don't know. Go to Wi-Fi manager, figure it out. You're gonna need to get it, and then you're gonna figure out its API, right? But there are certain patterns that are common to all of them. So let's figure this one out together. So a location manager does the following. You can do certain things. You can request location updates. That's equivalent of register or sign up or, you know, whatever you want to subscribe, whatever you want to call it, right? So request location updates is the way in, right? And then the remove location updates is going to be the out, right? Remove listener, whatever it's called. Make sense? So so that's basically what it is. There's also a useful method is get last known location, which tells you what the last known location is in case it takes a while to get, you know, the actual location. So let's do the following. So now that we have a location manager, I'll also define location. So what we could do in onCreate is we could say a location manager is location manager, right? Oops, wrong key combo. Control space, get system service, location service. Right? So I'm getting the system service that we need in this case, right? Location service. Now, if I simply wanted to know what the last known location was, I could say location is location manager dot get last known location. Now, it's going to ask you for a provider, and a provider is going to be usually one of the two providers that are available, mobile or GPS, right? So you can say location manager. You know what? I'll just define it as a constant provider. So I'm not typing it, so I'll say static final string provider. And it's location manager dot GPS provider, for instance. Okay, so that's basically our provider. So that's it. That's how we get the last known location, right? So we didn't really do anything too intense with this service. We basically just got a service and said get us the last known location. Now, if we want to know when the location changes, we can request updates and all that. So that's one way to do it. We can request a single update. Get providers, get best provider, blah, blah, blah. We can request location updates, or we can request a single update. And a single update can work via a pending intent, which we're not gonna do. So let's do our request location updates. Okay. So what I can do now is just like what we did before, define my on pause on and on resume, which we don't have, right? We don't have on pause and on resume. Cool. Okay. Actually, let me do it right here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna source override implement methods, and I'm gonna implement those two methods that we said we usually care about whenever we're dealing with something that we want to turn on off, right? So we talked about on pause and on resume, right? So basically, so far I defined location manager in onCreate, and I declared these two methods. So typically what you would do in on, and typically on resume would go before on pause, right? So what you would typically do here, you would say location manager dot request location updates. And I'm gonna pick the second one on the list, the one that takes the listener. So provider, it's gonna be a provider. Minimum time. How frequently do you want the updates to be communicated to you? And I believe it's in seconds or something like that. Let's assume it's in seconds. I'll say 30 seconds. Minimum distance before before you get notified. So if location changes just for like 5 meters, right? Do you really care? So you may say, look, we only care at a kilometer level. I know that's in that is in meters. But the first one I'm pretty sure is minimum time is in seconds. Milliseconds. Get out of here. So milliseconds. Okay. So basically provider milliseconds distance, right? And then finally who to notify when things actually do change. So what we could do is we could make do this, have this be notified, right? Yeah. Now the opposite of request location updates would be remove, right? So location manager dot remove. Not remove. Yeah. Remove updates this, yes. There we go. Thanks. So basically, same pattern what you had in Compass, right? You get your sensor manager, you register for notifications, and you unregister for notifications. Got it? So far, it's exactly the same. We're just using a different beast. Now, the third part was always to provide the handling, to provide the listener, right? So I'm gonna do that dance again. Remember when you fix the error, so you put the mouse here, you say let status activity implement on click listener. That adds that, and now you say add unimplemented methods, and that adds whatever it adds at the bottom. All these methods. So these are your location listener callbacks. Okay? So what you would typically care about is that I don't care about status changed, I don't care about provider disappearing. Like for example, if you want to know the GPS is no longer available, you can do something. I'm not. So the only one we care about is this one. I'm going to rename this to location, and I'll say this dot location. So I'm assigning it, and I could just print it out. Log.d tag comma on location changed plus location dot. Is there something get speed blah blah to string? Yeah, something like that. Well, in this case, because I had location here, so there's just to distinguish between the two. Like if I call this C, I could do it like this, right? Yeah. I guess location L, not C. So you can try running this. Let's see what happens. I'm going to run it on the emulator because I can show you. So let me see the logcat. Okay, so menu, start update, status update. Okay. What's that? Yeah, so, yeah, exactly. So this is failing because we do not have the permission. So that's an easy one, right? Let's see. So let's see what's happening here. So if I do a menu, status update, what's that? So I didn't turn off anything, but I didn't turn it on either. So right now our GPS is off. Yes, that's the default state. So what we can actually do is we can control to a certain extent GPS via the emulator controls. So you could actually select your emulator in DDMS. You could go under emulator controls and you can pretend that it's got a connection. So I can send it a location. And notice that now this turned on, right? And guess what? We know about it. Ta-dang! Right? So, what's that? I guess not. Oh, it says it has altitude, but it's set at 0. Well, which is probably appropriate. Do you guys know which location this is? 37.42205 and minus 1225, 122, and then that. Yeah, I'm using the emulator. Yeah, it's Googleplex. Yeah. So altitude of 0 is about right, give or take 10 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm getting a reading refresh condition.
So a couple of things. It seems that for some of you, it seems, see how we were just testing this and we define a permission here. So if you're using my code, it seems that it asks you to explicitly say uses permission and then that permission there. Okay, so it's kind of like we're defining it and we're defining that we're using it. So I'm not sure why. So that seems to be a problem in some cases. And the other thing that I noticed was the username password server. And sure, I'll plug in the defaults so you don't have to, if you're wiping up your code, you don't have to remember to put in. So cool. So those are the two minor fixes that we have. Oh, another thing that I noticed, it seems that in certain emulators, you need to, did that work? Did you need to enable specifically GPS? Like you may have to enable GPS here. I'm not sure. I did not have to do that, obviously. But if you know, you could try to edit your emulator or your AVD and put in that information. So worked, right?
If you've given 1,000 meters, that means that when you're emulating the location update, it has to be greater than that in order for the sensor to actually fire off an update.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. So you gotta watch for that in testing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So just to recap what we just did, we did the following. I defined globally my location manager location just to be nice, right? I got the references to variables. You know, this was optional to find get lost in on location. But the key was that you register in on resume and you unregister in on pause, right? So request updates, remove updates, right? And what that does, once you register, you're basically saying call me when there's a change, because we said this here, right? So that is our listener. So this better implement on-click listener, right? And to be an on-click listener, you know, you need to specify your on-click listener, and you get all these callbacks. And I only cared about the one that says on location changed, right? So so let's see. So far, no change in location. So what happens if I now go and change the location? What if I change it by 38? I'm gonna change like this digit from 2 to 3, right? Send. That didn't really do anything. But what if I change 37 to 38?
That's what I'm asking. It has to be beyond that 1,000 meter range.
The minutes is 30 minutes, right? So every 30 minutes. But yeah, so that, oh, okay, there it is. So 30 minutes later, it noticed my 38, right? Yeah, because that's, you know, changing a whole degree, you know, is way more than 1,000 meters, right? Yeah. So okay. Cool. So that's working. If you wanted to now plug it further into our example, you could. I believe that there's something on Twitter that says set location. Set location or something. Oh, set my location. Duh. But you need to convert it to this like number. Set valid range from -90 to +90 east-west and -180 to +180, and you need to create an array. So yeah, it's up to you if you want to do that. I don't really care. Okay, but you got the idea. So now we could do that if you wanted to change it. Cool. Any questions on system services?
Now, when you start, when you have get last known location, when you first, let's say, boot up the device, you know, sometimes you have that, okay, map my location the first time ever. That's the method that's called.
So which one?
The first time ever to get to know your location,
yeah,
will be get last known location.
Yeah,
that would still be the method.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, guess last known location is there just to kind of give you the last known location, because sometimes it may take minutes or you know, or forever to actually get the GPS coordinates, right? Like on my Samsung Galaxy, it could take me like half an hour to get like a lock on GPS, right? Horrible GPS. So so for that purpose, what you can do is you can basically
you don't do the GPS and do the self, use a different provider, I guess.
Yeah, you could get the last known location and kind of use that as the starting point until you get a lock. Yeah, yeah, that's a good way. I mean, there are other methods to query what the best provider is. You can also do a search for provider. You can specify criteria. You can say I want a provider that has altitude but doesn't cost money, or is a low power consumption and so on, because different providers have different criterias. I mean, I personally think they over-engineered it a little bit, because you only have two things really in reality. But
for this to work, let's say on a particular device, you have to also ensure that the user changes from, let's say, only GPS or only cell to both of them. Because you have a setting like that on the devices, right?
Yes, but you can query. Like, so your app can intelligently say what's available. Maybe Wi-Fi is not, maybe GPS is not available, or you cannot get the information. So let's do, the plan B, and so on. So that's the whole point. You are capable of doing some querying, right? So you can say get providers. So this is gonna get you the list of all available providers, right? Then you can say get providers for a criteria and only show me enabled, for instance, right? Right? So you can basically specify get all providers, for example, just returns the entire list and so on and so on. So you can basically do a search like that. You can also say, okay, I really want GPS, it's not available, get me network, but let me know when GPS becomes available, right? Because even now, we're going to get notified in our code when GPS becomes, when provider gets disabled or enabled, right? So we all know when GPS is gone. So you can then switch to an alternative and so on. So far, so good?